Sign this check over to your brother or you are not walking out of here. My mother didn't wish me a happy birthday. She just slid the $500,000, my grandfather's gift to me, across the table like it was a ransom payment. When I didn't reach for the pen, my father walked to the door and locked it. Then he turned his phone screen toward me. It was a photo of our front porch taken from a black car sitting in the driveway right now. The loan sharks are outside, Alina. You pay Marcus's debt or they come in. Before I tell you what I did with that pen, drop a comment and let me know what is the worst gift a family member has ever given you. I'm reading every single one. I looked at the locked door, then back at my parents. Panic is a luxury I couldn't afford. In my line of work, when you find a discrepancy in the ledger, you don't scream, you investigate. And right now, the discrepancy was sitting in the middle of the table. A stale, store-bought cupcake with a single unlit candle. I stared at that sad little cake, and for a split second, I wasn't 29. I was 10 years old again, sitting at the same table, squeezing my eyes shut and wishing with everything I had that my parents would look at me the way they looked at Marcus. I wished that just once I wouldn't be the invisible tuition payment or the future retirement plan, but their daughter. I looked at Vanessa's knuckles, white as she gripped the check, and Raymond's eyes darting toward the window where the black car waited. They weren't here to celebrate my life. They were here to harvest it, to save their son. In that moment, I mentally leaned forward and blew out that 10-year-old's candle. The smoke didn't smell like birthday wax. It smelled like a bridge burning. The daughter in me died in that chair, and the forensic auditor took over. I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I leaned back and let my pulse slow down. Fear makes people stupid, and right now, I needed to be the smartest person in the room. If I sign this check, I said, my voice terrifyingly calm, Marcus is dead by morning. Vanessa blinked, her aggression faltering for a second. What are you talking about? It's money. It saves him. It's $500,000. Mother, you don't just hand that over. The second I endorse this to Marcus, the bank files a suspicious activity report. It's automatic for any transfer over $10,000. For $500,000, they freeze the account for a minimum of 7 days for an AML review, anti-money laundering. If those sharks don't get their cash by sunrise, they come through that door. And if the IRS sees Marcus getting $500,000 with no documented source, they seize it for back taxes before he can pay anyone. Raymond looked at his phone again. He was sweating. So what do? We can't wait 7 days. We have to make it look legitimate. I lied. The lie tasted like copper, sharp and electric. We need to hide the asset. If the sharks run a background check and see you own this house, they'll know you have equity. They'll take the cash and then they'll force you to sign over the deed anyway, just for the interest. You need asset protection. I saw the greed flicker in Raymond's eyes. He didn't want to save Marcus. He wanted to save his house. How? We transfer the title of this house into a blind trust tonight, an anonymous LLC. I set it up as a corporate acquisition. The money transfers instantly as a business deal, bypassing the personal hold. The sharks run a search. They see you own nothing. You're judgment-proof. The money clears, Marcus pays them off, and the house sits safely in the trust until the heat dies down. It was a complex web of nonsense mixed with just enough financial buzzwords to sound terrifyingly real. I watched them exchange a look. They didn't know I was lying because they never cared enough to ask what I actually did for a living. They just knew I handled money. Do it, Vanessa said, pushing the laptop toward me. Fix this. I opened the screen. The blue light reflected in my eyes, hiding the fact that I wasn't saving them. I was digging their grave. Dad scrambled out of the room to get his laptop, his footsteps heavy and frantic on the hardwood. He was running to fetch the shovel I was going to use to bury him. I sat there in the silence with Vanessa. She was watching me, her chest heaving, probably congratulating herself on finding the right button to push. She thought she had broken me. She thought she was looking at a daughter who had finally fallen in line, but she was looking at a creditor. I looked around the room while we waited. It really was a beautiful dining room. Hand-cut Italian marble floors, custom wainscoting, a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than my first car. I knew exactly how much all of this cost, because I knew exactly where the money came from. It didn't come from Raymond's job. It came from my femur. When I was 18, a semi-truck ran a red light and T-boned my sedan. I spent 3 months in traction and learned to walk again before I went to prom. The insurance settlement was substantial, $185,000. Pain and suffering, they called it. I remember the day the check arrived. Vanessa held my hand. She told me I was too young to manage that kind of wealth. She said they would put it in a safe investment account for me when I was ready to buy a home or start a family. I trusted them. I was 18 and I was in pain, and they were my parents. 2 months later, Marcus drove his pickup truck through the front window of a liquor store. He blew 0.18. It should have been prison. It should have been a felony record. But suddenly, my parents had the cash for the best criminal defense attorney in the state. Marcus got probation. The charges were expunged. And when I asked about my investment account a year later, Vanessa told me the market had crashed. She lied to me without blinking. I didn't know the truth then. I know it now. I traced the transfers myself 3 years ago when I got my certification. They drained my pain and suffering to buy Marcus's freedom. They took the settlement for my broken leg and used it to fix their golden child's mistakes. And it didn't stop there. While they were renovating this house, adding the marble floors and the new wing, I was living in a basement apartment in the city that smelled like black mold and cat litter. I was eating instant noodles and working double shifts to pay for textbooks because my college fund had mysteriously evaporated to cover Marcus's gambling debts in Las Vegas. They sat in luxury, paid for by my trauma, and they let me rot. I looked at Vanessa now. She was smoothing the tablecloth, agitated, checking the door for Raymond. She had no idea that every luxury in this room, every asset she was terrified of losing to the loan sharks, was already paid for by me. Taking this house wasn't theft. It wasn't a scam. It was a reimbursement. I was just collecting on a debt that had been accruing interest for 11 years. "You're doing the right thing, Elena," Vanessa said, mistaking my silence for contemplation. "Family helps family." "I know," I said, my voice steady. "That's exactly what I'm doing." I was helping the only family member that mattered anymore. Me. Raymond came back into the room, clutching his laptop to his chest like a shield. He set it down on the table, pushing aside a centerpiece of dried flowers that probably cost $500. He opened the lid, his eyes darting from the screen to the window where the imaginary black car was waiting. He typed in his password, Marcus 888, of course, and stared at the digital transfer portal I'd pulled up. His finger hovered over the trackpad. He was sweating. A bead of perspiration rolled down his temple and caught in his collar. "I don't know, Vanessa," he muttered, his voice cracking. "Transferring the deed, this feels extreme. What if the trust doesn't release it back? We need a lawyer to look at this." "We don't have time for lawyers, Raymond," Vanessa hissed. "Look at the time. Look at the window." I know, but he looked at me, suspicion finally cutting through his panic. "Why are you helping us, Elena? You never help. You hoard every cent you make. Why the sudden change of heart?" He was weak, but he wasn't entirely stupid. He sensed the trap if he couldn't see the teeth. I opened my mouth to spin another layer of financial jargon about equity shielding and emergency liquidity, but Vanessa didn't let me speak. She snapped. The facade of the concerned mother vanished, replaced by something feral. She lunged across the corner of the table and grabbed my wrist. Her nails dug into my skin, sharp and painful.
"She's helping because she doesn't have a choice," Vanessa spat, her face inches from mine. "Listen to me closely, Elena. You are going to walk your father through this process, and you are going to do it right now. Or what? I asked softly. You'll ground me? Vanessa's eyes narrowed into slits. Or I pick up this phone and call 911. I tell them my daughter is in the middle of a psychotic break. I tell them you're threatening self-harm. I tell them about the antidepressants you took in college. I tell them you're unstable, dangerous, and unable to care for yourself. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You wouldn't, I said, but I knew she would. I will file for an emergency conservatorship by morning, she whispered, the words sliding out like venom. I will tell the court you aren't competent to manage your own affairs. Think about it, Elena, a forensic auditor with a documented history of mental instability, a 5150 hold on your record. You will lose your license. You will lose your clearance. You will never audit another company as long as you live. I will burn your career to the ground to save your brother. I looked at her. I really looked at her. For years, I had told myself they were just flawed, that they loved me in their own broken way. But looking into her eyes now, I saw the truth. There was no love there. There wasn't even likeness. There was only a predator looking at a resource. She was willing to lobotomize my life, strip me of my autonomy, and destroy the only thing I had built for myself, my career, just to keep the cash flow running from Marcus. She wasn't my mother. She was a hostile combatant. And with that threat, the last microscopic grain of guilt I had about taking their house evaporated. It turned to ash. I didn't pull my wrist away. I didn't flinch. I let a slow, cold smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just watched the prey step into the snare. You're right, Mom, I said, my voice steady as a flatline. Family comes first. Let's get this done. I turned to Raymond. Open the browser. I've booked an emergency online notary appointment under a corporate merger code. She's waiting in the lobby. We have 10 minutes before the slot expires. Vanessa released my wrist, looking triumphant. She thought she had won. She thought she had scared me into submission. She had no idea she had just signed her own eviction notice. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dim room, casting long, sharp shadows across the marble table. I checked the time in the corner of the display. 7:42 p.m. We have 18 minutes, I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I called in a favor with a corporate notary service I use for hostile takeovers. I've booked an emergency remote slot under a merger and acquisition code. She's in the digital waiting room right now. If we miss this window, the asset protection deal dies and Marcus is on his own. It was a lie. A beautiful, high-pressure lie designed to short-circuit their critical thinking. There was no merger code. There was just a standard 24-hour notary service anyone could book for $50. But they didn't know that. They only knew panic. Raymond wiped his forehead with his sleeve. What do we do? Sit here, I ordered, spinning the laptop to face him. I've prepared a quitclaim deed. We are transferring the title of this property into a holding company called Alethea Holdings, LLC. Alethea? Vanessa squinted at the screen. Who owns that? It's a blind trust shell, I said, layering the jargon with confident, rapid-fire delivery. It shields the asset. If the loan sharks run a title search tomorrow, they'll see the house was sold to a corporate entity. It looks like you liquidated. They can't put a lien on a house you don't own. It effectively makes you judgment-proof while the money moves. And the taxes? Raymond asked, his voice trembling. He was always terrified of the IRS. That's why we do it this way, I said, leaning in. If I just give you the check, it's a gift. You get hit with a 40% tax. But if we structure it as a corporate asset liquidity exchange, we bypass the gift tax threshold entirely. It's called layering. It's how the ultra-rich stay rich. They nodded. They didn't understand a word I was saying, but they nodded because they wanted to believe there was a magic trick that fixed everything. They were greedy, and greed makes people incredibly easy to deceive. The video call connected. A woman in a blazer appeared on the screen, looking bored. "Good evening. I have a deed transfer for signatures." "Yes," I said. "My clients are ready." Raymond hesitated. His hand hovered over the trackpad. For a second, a flicker of survival instinct kicked in. "Elena, this trust, it transfers the house back to us in 30 days, right? Once the sharks are paid?" I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't blink. "The contract follows the money, Dad. Once the debt is settled, the asset creates balance." It was a technically true statement. The debt was the money they stole from me from my settlement, plus interest. The debt was settled. "We'll sue you," Raymond shouted. "Please do," I said. "Explain to a judge how you signed a quitclaim deed to hide assets and evade taxes." Silence. "You can fight the eviction," I continued, hand on the door, "or be out by noon tomorrow. Otherwise, the forensic audit goes to the IRS and the district attorney." I left them there, small, trapped, terrified. At 2:14 a.m., my phone alerted me. Motion detected. Marcus was breaking into my old apartment with a tire iron, hunting cash that wasn't there. "Smile," I said through the app. "You're on the cloud." I had sent him on a pointless task. He was still clawing at an empty vent when the police arrived. 30 days later, my parents were living in a motel. The house was sold, the money was secure. Grandpa slid a new check across the desk. $500,000 for your own firm this time. My hand didn't shake. I burned the bridge so the demons couldn't follow. If this story stayed with you longer than the video itself, don't walk away. Subscribe. This channel is for people who actually feel what they hear. And if you've ever escaped a toxic family, you're not alone. Comment your story below and share this with someone who needs to hear it.